Well. We've finally come to the conclusion of season 2 of Severance. Listen, that finale was an emotional roller coaster for me. And to that end, the show did its job. Again, I believe great art makes you feel things, even if that feeling isn't all happy and cheery. So the finale still left a lot of questions open, but overall, my suspicion is that everything with Lumen has to do with birth and rebirth, and I think that is holding up even with this episode. So let's get into it before I start yapping any further. The cabin confrontation. The episode begins where the last episode ended. Cobell asks Innie Mark if he has finished Cold Harbor. Mark S. is rightfully confused by the context of everything. He's finally able to answer that Cold Harbor file has not been completed and says that he recognizes the export hall from Irving's drawings. Cobell explains that Gemma will die when Cold Harbor is completed. Devin and Cobell give Mark the plan for freeing Gemma, which Mark S. responds with confusion and doubt. Then Devin says about the dumbest thing she could say in that moment. She says that saving Gemma will end Lumen, which naturally begs the question, what happens to the Innies? Mark S. sees saving Gemma as sacrificing all of the lives for the Innies for just one person. Devin clearly did not prepare for that line of questioning and then transitioned to what becomes a ping-pong conversation through camcorder between Innie and Outie Mark. And I think, quite frankly, Devin making that statement was just to get the plot forward, but girl, you could have said anything else to make Innie Mark, and I guess Innie Mark not realize that he would die as a result of saving Gemma. But I guess that's also an honest part of it. At least they're being forthright about the idea that, yes, Innie Mark is essentially going to have to sacrifice himself in order to save Gemma and his Outie. So Outie Mark is, in the initial video, Innie Mark seems quite happy that he gets to see his Outie. Outie Mark apologizes and says Innie Mark is a prisoner who has been living a nightmare. Outie Mark promises to make things right. Outie Mark is equally initially happy to see his Innie, but Innie Mark responds by saying that being at Lumen is not a nightmare because the Innies find a way to feel whole. So the proposition of sacrificing their life is scary since they still have things they live for. Outie Mark explains that the reintegration process and how Innie Mark won't die because they will be reintegrated and therefore share a life together. After recording the message, Mark breaks his optimistic facade. I don't think Mark is necessarily being duplicitous here, but I do think that he knows he can't show his full, rageful desire to be reunited with his wife. He has to be able to concede to his Innie to get Gemma, and I think it's hard for him to truly care about his Innie in the face of a potential reunion with his wife. So he's thinking about his Innie. He's like, you're going to still live. You're going to be a breathing entity, just not maybe conscious. It's probably his perspective there. Innie Mark begins to show frustration, asking really great questions about the dynamic between the two Marks once they're reintegrated. Outie Mark doesn't have the best answer, and Innie Mark is able to disintegrate Outie Mark's entire argument by quickly pointing out that since Outie Mark has been alive 20 times longer, it comes to reason that Outie Mark will be more dominant in the hybrid person created after reintegration. Outie Mark then tries to get sympathy points by talking about losing his job because he turned to alcoholism and needing to hide all Gemma's items to pretend that she never existed. He then makes a familiar dumb move by bringing up Innie Mark's affair with who he calls Helene. This clearly pisses Innie Mark off and is reminiscent of the scene with Helena Egan when she meets Mark at the Chinese restaurant and calls Gemma Hannah. Innie Mark sees how Outie Mark is deprioritizing his and Helly's life, which prompts his response that Outie Mark has never taken interest in his life until he needs something. I thought this was a bit unfair since it's not like they've been able to talk to each other substantially before this moment, and the only reason Outie Mark has more intel or Innie Mark has more intel on Outie Mark is because he got to do the overtime contingency thing. So that's the only reason why Innie Mark knows a lot about Outie Mark. Innie Mark starts to question the veracity of Outie Mark's words, including questioning if reintegration is real. Outie Mark promises he won't abandon Innie Mark, but Innie Mark is seeing none of it. Innie Mark can't trust Outie Mark, so Mark has to call Cobell for help. Before this, Devin says that, the Innie Mark is not 100% wrong about thinking reintegration is bullshit, since we've seen for a very long time in this show, since I think episode 3, Who Is Alive, we've seen this integration process start, and it doesn't show any fruition up to this point. Although I would say I wonder why they haven't mentioned Petey and why it seemed to work for him and not for Mark. Cobell explains to Any Mark that the numbers he's refining are the doorway into the mind of Gemma. The numbers align to Gemma's 4 tempers, which remember are woe, frolic, malice, and dread. Every file is a new consciousness for Gemma. Thus far, 24 consciousnesses have been created, and the 25th conscious will be the Cold Harbor file. Once Cold Harbor is completed, Any Mark will have served his purpose, essentially saying that regardless of Any Mark's choice, his life will be discarded. There will be no honeymoon ending for Mark and Helly, because they are nothing to the E10s. At least with helping Mark, he's giving the option for reintegration. Any Mark says the next time he's conscious, he better be on the 7th floor, and for that part, the crew does agree with this. Now, before I continue with my recap, I need to say something. This entire episode was about us questioning our own perception of the rights of innies. And I got to say, I really struggled seeing it from the perspective of Any Mark. Like, I got it, but I also was like, Gemma's been kidnapped, and Mark needs to be saved from his depression. I realized that despite my insistence that innies and outies are separate people in my past reviews, when push came to shove, I saw it more for the outies' perspective. And that's because technically all of us are outies. So yeah, this episode was really hard for me because it started to really dawn on me that I did not have that much empathy for the innies, and if there were an ultimatum situation for everyone except probably Helly, like Hell and I could care less for, but for everybody else, I'm like, I think you need to let your outie exist, because for Dylan, he has children. For Irving, he has Radar, which we're not really sure Irving would be able to take care of Radar. And then of course with Mark, you have this whole wife that he thought has died and isn't, and he deserves to be able to live a life with her. So I realized that this is something that the show was really trying to get us to grasp, because especially in season 1, we spent so much time with the innies, and season 2 as well, and we kind of always had assumed that innies had lives that were worth living. But then again, when push comes to shove, it's very hard for the average person, I'm assuming, or maybe you might challenge me and say, nah, I was always for the innie. But that's what the show's challenging us on. So did you also struggle with kind of trying to sympathize with Any Mark here, or were you also like me, kind of like, I just think that outie Mark deserves priority in this situation? And on another note, I can't ignore a lot just because of how great this episode was and the emotional highs it got me to. But these scenes did make me scratch my head about the whole reintegration plot overall, since I feel like we could have gotten to this point without reintegration. Let me know what you guys think about the reintegration subplot with Ragabi, and whether the emotional heights of this episode could have been achieved without it. Because after I watched this episode now twice, and I've rewatched several scenes several times, and I think there was a way to write this without the whole reintegration plot, because it clearly confused some people, particularly in episode 9, the After Hours. So before we get into the rest of the shenanigans that occurs on the 7th floor, let's talk about James Egan's interaction with Helly. So everyone was speculating about what James "you tricked me" meant, and of course it was the most simplest answer, which I think that's what Severance always comes back to. It's the simplest answer. He was in fact referring to the gala betrayal. Helly peeps that James Egan is very weird when he describes being so angry that he threw a tin of candies. James then claims that he does not love his daughter because the care he saw in her left as she grew. He talks about having other children in the shadows, where Kier also failed to make his appearance, but Kier is present in Helly. Now here's the interesting part. After Helly says the Egans are going to burn in hell, James says, there he is. This alludes to the idea that Kier is present in passion and tenacity displayed by Helly. These are definitely elements that we lose as we age, since we're forced to become more practical to survive. I do wonder if James believes he sees Kier in himself, and considering by the looks of it, it's not. So how is he able to assess who Kier is living in when he himself doesn't have the spirit of Kier? And I'm just interested how this is going to be brought into season 3, which is, what is this fire of Kier? Who contains Kier's spirit and why? And does Kier's fire support the innies or outies? Like, in this situation, would Kier say, yeah, innies deserve to live, and you know what, fuck Gemma. Oh my god, I can't believe it. I would never say that. But you know, like, F Gemma, F all that, the innies deserve to live. Or would he have more sympathies for the outies? Or does the fire of Kier have a solution for a fulfilling life for both innies and outies? So I'm just interested in this fire of Kier and how it's going to appear in next season. I did watch a brief video, and I will comment this because I think it's quite compelling, of somebody positing that maybe Jaime Egan is going to try to basically bring Helly to the outside because she has the spirit of Kier, the fire of Kier. So maybe she's going to become the dominant consciousness within the body of Helena Egan, as opposed to Helena Egan being that full body. And I do wonder what that might feel like if you're an outie and then suddenly you go dark, and then the next time you get consciousness, it's like been, several months. Either way, we'll have to wait and see what they do here. But I do think that this scene is very important because I think the fire of Kier is going to be relevant to whatever events happen in season 3. So let's talk about Dylan's resignation, the tale of two Dylans. Fortunately, this episode does provide at least one caring relationship between an innie and an outie. Milchick greets Dylan at the elevator and takes him to a private room. Milchick gives outie Dylan's response to the resignation request in a black envelope. Milchick excuses himself in the most hilarious way by saying that the response might yield embarrassing emotional response and that he is swamped. And then he yeets out of there, just completely goes out of there. It was one of the funniest moments I've ever seen, and I'm sure that gif of Milchick's exit is going to become a part of the internet lexicon for the future. Outie Dylan responds to the resignation in 3 parts. First, he's angry that his innie had a minor affair with his wife, but he gets it. That's his point number 2, because he's never been an impressive person, is enticed by the idea that his innie was a self-assured badass. Outie Dylan hopes to be able to display what Gretchen sees in innie Dylan, and for that reason, he likes knowing innie Dylan exists. Outie Dylan gives innie Dylan the ultimate choice of whether to resign or not, and for innie Dylan, that means whether to live or die. And as we see later, Dylan decides to stay. I know this moment pales in comparison to all the emotional points throughout this episode, but I think it's a really important dynamic. Outie Dylan respects innie Dylan. Of course, the Dylans don't have the either-or existence dynamic that the Marks do, but it's important to see how outies and innies can work in concert with each other that ultimately gives agency to both parties. So I think that this is going to be very important in future episodes to show, hey, maybe innies and outies can work in concert. So maybe Dylan is also going to become very important in the future because he might be the only person who's going to be able to have an active communication between his innie and his outie. All right, the completion of the Cold Harbor file. Upon arrival at the severed floor, Innie Mark is confronted with a new painting called The Exalted Victory of Cold Harbor. The painting depicts Mark closing his eyes and raising his hand as if in praise and worship. In clusters beside Mark are all the members of the MDR team: Milchick, Cobell, Miss Casey, Devin, Rickon, O&D team members, Miss Huang, Natalie, the Mammalian Nurturable team, those creepy holographic counterparts of the MDR team from Orpo, and the 4 dancing Teppers, and even those 3 new MDR members who were eventually dismissed. So yes, my girl Alia Shakak came back just in a painted form. Anyway, above everything is the Egan lineage that includes Helena. I know people are going to dissect the painting to high heavens, but I think it's simply a weird way of Lumen thanking Mark S. for his contributions to Lumen by depicting how his work will impact literally everyone he has met throughout his innie life. Helly comes down the elevator and they go together to the MDR office. The lights are on economy mode. Lumen was like, we poor, we can't keep the lights on permanently. And they only light up for each step taking forward. So I really like this choice. It is very dramatic. And I personally thought that it was enticing in terms of creating a compelling narrative with that walk. When they reach the MDR room, they are greeted by an animatronic Kier Egan, shrouded in blue light. Milchick left a letter for Mark explaining the presence of Kier as witness. The card opens up to a cardboard waffle. Their desks then light up and the computers turn on. Helly tells Mark about James' visit. Mark tells Helly he knows why it's a moment to stay. Helly voices criticism of Cobell, but Mark says she seemed different. Mark considers not finishing the file, but Helly points out that finishing the file could take Lumen down, and Mark could live on a reintegration. Mark still doesn't trust his Audi, but Helly insists on giving a chance at living. And I think this is super important because, of course, a lot of people have theories about Helly/Helena at the end of this episode, and I think that this scene particularly is the key hint about what actually is happening at the end of this episode. Mark then says he wants to live with Helly. Helly understands, and she says she's Helena, and therefore she knows that her chance at a happy life is almost impossible. Her life is always going to be significantly less important than an actual Egan. And in this moment, Mark seems to resolve to follow his Audi's plan. Helly tries to name all the places she knows and comes up with a short list that includes the equator. They don't know if the equator is a building or a continent. And again, it kind of shows this really sad sort of restriction that all these innies have had on the beauty of life, that I'm sure most everybody who's gotten elementary education knows what the equator is, but it's just so sad that these innies are restricted from even having a strong knowledge of what that is. Mark completes the files and the lights shut down. Meanwhile, Gemma is made to wear the outfit she wore before her quote-unquote accident, and Mr. Drummond tells Dr. Maurer to call Mr. Egan. And now let's get to the HBCU themed celebration. For those who don't know, HBCU is a historically Black university or college or university. And these universities, their most popular aspect, they're known for their marching band. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with Beyonce. And during her Coachella performance, she brought out a marching band, and her whole entire theme was HBCU. So yes, marching bands exist at most universities or major universities here in America, but the HBCUs are known for having this elite style of performance that is so involved with dancing and, different themes. And I think that this particular, in my opinion, and people might come for me for this, I believe that this whole entire marching band scene is a call out to HBCUs, and there's certain styling, the way that Mr. Milchek dances, the way that some of the drummers drum, that were hints to me that this wasn't a marching band in the quote-unquote conventional sense. This was HBCU. So to other people who are familiar with HBCU culture, let me know if you also think that Lumen strangely was making a shout out to HBCUs. After the light shut off, a classic sports song comes on. I know the song, but I could not remember the name. And the Kier animatronic addresses Mark. Did anyone also think from a wide shot from the back, the Kier animatronic looked like Keanu Reeves? I can never pronounce Keanu Reeves, but you know the guy from The Matrix. Is this potential foreshadowing for future casting? But I just, the facial structure, everything looked spot on with Keanu Reeves. And just let me know if you also saw that. Anyway, the Kier animatronic says that Mark is one of the most important people in history. Then he enthusiastically introduces the floor manager. And I was actually really surprised. I was like, floor manager? Who's that? Then come to find out it's Milchek. Milchek and Kier have a conversation where we learn that in a joking way, Kier's favorite core principle is vision. And as we can recall from Miss Huang's Wintertide Fellowship statue, we are in the year of vision. The animatronic then makes a jab at Milchek's verbosity. This clearly hurts Milchek, but he's able to come back with a barb about Kier's real height. And then I feel like they switch voice actors. I don't know what's happening, but I think Dr. Maurer then comes on the mic and snidely rebukes Seth, and he says Seth very proudly. We then learn that there's a choreography and merriment department. I assume that this is the same department that performs for the waffle party that we saw in the season 1 finale, but it's just wild to me that there's a whole team of people who are severed simply to perform in a marching band. Like, are they on salary or is this contract? Because if they're salaried, shout out to Lumen for supporting the arts, because so many artistic people, especially people who do have the skill and ability to be in a marching band, they are not salaried individuals. So anyway, the band did an awesome rendition of Cheer, chosen one, Kier. And then they do this card thing where they show Mark hitting the 100%. So I love how despite how emotionally hard hitting this episode is, they're still able to indulge in the comedy, and I really appreciated this scene. Mark starts making plans to leave his celebration. Helly and Mark tell each other that they will see each other at the equator. As a distraction, Helly steals Milchek's walkie-talkie and throws it into the toilet. She then locks Milchek in the bathroom by holding the door. And I hate it when those cinema sin people always say things about the strength between men and women. It's like, it's a superhero show. But I will say, I watched this and I was like, I don't think Helly would be able to hold her own against Milchek. I think Milchek would have yanked that door out. She would have been yeeted into the bathroom. Anyway, elsewhere, James Egan is taking an efficacy test, and Mr. Drummond enters a room opposite the export hall. Mark is making his way to the export hall with Irving's instruction. Dylan then comes to Helly's rescue, and when she's unable to hold the door, and blocks the bathroom with a vending machine. And so let's get into this bloody rescue mission. I really never thought the show would get this explicitly violent. Like, we see verbal violence clearly throughout this entire show, but I really was not expecting this whatsoever, but exciting stuff. Gemma makes her way to the Cold Harbor room. In the Cold Harbor room, there's a single crib with a screwdriver on the bed. Gemma is unable to say who she is, and James Egan is pleased with her response. She's instructed to take the crib apart, a call back to when Mark angrily dismantled the crib after a failed fertility treatment. Dr. Maurer is happy that the barrier is holding, likely alluding to the fact that Gemma can't remember the core trauma of her fertility issues. The unnamed Gwendolyn Christie character from Amalien's Nurturable brings a baby goat, or kid as they say, as an offering to Mr. Drummond in a room across from the exports hall. Drummond asks if the kid has verve and wiles, 2 of Lumen's 9 core principles. Gwendolyn responds in the affirmative. Drummond says, quote, "The beast will be entombed with a cherished woman, whose spirit it must guide to Kyr's door." I'm assuming that the goat, or like the overall spirit of the goat, is intended to help bring Drummond's fertility so that she can birth the next reincarnation of Kyr. This is a guess, but this episode does not really give us secure answers, but I'm guessing that this has something to do with Gemma, and I kind of guessed that something about the completion of all of these files had something to do with actually getting Gemma able to have a baby, but the baby wouldn't necessarily be Mark's. And again, I do think that Kyr is sort of an analog to Jesus, and so this will be an immaculate conception / IVF. Technically, IVFs are immaculate conceptions, and she would kind of reincarnate Kyr through that way. And that sounds magical thinking, and it probably is. And I also know that this episode does not want to worry about that too much. So anyway, Drummond gets a blicky from a cabinet and dispenses a singular bullet. Gwendolyn's character is clearly not down for the sacrifice and makes references to past sacrifices. The kid is then put in a saddle type contraption. Drummond talks about Kyr's eternal war against suffering. Gwendolyn is given the gun to shoot the kid, but hesitates. Then Drummond hears Mark kicking the door of the export hall and confronts Mark with violence I never thought we'd see in the show. Mark gets punched and thrown about, and he's about to be choked out by Drummond's large hands when Gwendolyn Christie brings the gun to Drummond's head. Drummond is able to disarm Gwendolyn, but my girl is using that Brienne of Tarth's strength to tear down Drummond. Innie Mark has the brilliant idea to use Drummond as a hostage at the lower level. I just laughed because I realized that that never even panned out. But anyway, we learned that the kid's name is Emil. Superb acting from the goat child here. Very cute. They're so cute. Anyway, meanwhile, Milchek is making progress on getting out of the bathroom. Helly is using the instruments to block Milchek's means of egress. And I think the trumpets seen here are a reference to, in the intro sequence, we see trumpets falling out of Irving's coffee mug. I thought that they were notes at first, but I think that these are the trumpets that are being referenced in that intro sequence. So cool to see how they kind of run full circle on the intro. And I might do another video coming back to the intro and what I think it means based on us now knowing the entirety of season 2. So the choreography and merriment department is called back to their departments, but Helly pleads with them. She says that they will be all turned off if Milchek is able to escape. She poignantly says, "They give us half a life and think we won't fight for it." Again, a part of the reason why a lot of us struggle to sympathize with Innie Mark. It's because we don't see his life as full. All right, now let's get to the Sophie's Choice. Upon descending the elevator, Audi Mark accidentally sets off the gun, which kills Drummond. Audi Mark makes his way through the hall, searching for the Cold Harbor room. The nurse blocks Mark from the Cold Harbor room, but he's able to ward her off with the gun. Audi Mark then uses the blood from his tie to open the door, and we get a tense reunion between Mark and Gemma. Mark tells Gemma that he is her husband, while Dr. Maurer tells Gemma not to speak to that man. Gemma is able to discern that Mark is here not to hurt her. And I think that this is probably breaking the perception between Dr. Maurer and James Egan of the success of boundaries. So despite the fact that she, this is this new consciousness that has probably a stronger, even though maybe only 2-minute longer relationship with the Dr. Maurer voice, I think she's able to sense that Mark is somebody that she should trust and that she should go with. So clearly their barriers aren't that well. And Mr. Egan says, "Oh, fuck." And so that was the first time we kind of saw him stop using that austere, 19th century language. It seems as though he's representing his true emotions, and he's realizing that the severance procedure might not be as cleanly executed as they thought. Now the next scene had my heart thumping. Gemma steps out of the Cold Harbor room and her consciousness returns. She recognizes Mark and they have a gut-wrenching reunion. An alarm goes off and the floor flashes red. There's a quick flash to Helly, who, theory time here, becomes Helena as the Glasgow block is put into place. For those of you who are wondering, I'm going to become better at editing. I really do need to sit at this computer and just learn how to get videos from Apple TV. But it's at hour 1, minute 7, and second 26. You'll notice that they flash to Helly and Helena's faces change, and the next time we see Helly/Helena is in that hallway in front of the staircase. Mark and Gemma make a dash to the elevator. Before they enter the elevator, Dr. Maurer says, "You'll kill them all." This was kind of alarming to me because Dr. Maurer seems like a sadistic fuck. So why would he care about the lives of anybody? And I wonder if he means that Mark is going to kill all the iterations or Gemma, or if they're going to kill all of the innies. And I'm leaning towards all the innies dying, but I am wondering if there's a process that's more automatic with the innies dying, or, basically that severed process not working anymore, than just a collapse of Lumen's enterprises, right? There's something that happens beyond just Lumen no longer bringing people down to the severed floor. So let me know what your thoughts are on what Dr. Maurer means you're going to kill them all. And I guess the answer is the simplest, which is that all the innies will die by virtue of Lumen no longer being able to get people onto the severed floor because the government or the institutions that be will shut them down. In the elevator, Audi, Mark, and Gemma share a passionate kiss. They are then changed to Miss Casey and Mark S. Innie Mark on the severed floor, and Mark S. And when they're on the severed floor, they just have this weird interaction where it's clear that they're basically strangers to each other, but Mark S. knows what to do, and he makes a mad dash for the staircase. Milchek is finally able to knock the vending machine down, but we see that choreography and merriment decided to support Helly and block Milchek from leaving the MDR room. Mark successfully gets Miss Casey to the stairwell where she becomes Gemma, but Innie Mark does not follow. He hesitates joining Gemma, knowing this may be his last conscious memory. The decision is made even more difficult when Helly, or Helena, calls out to Mark as well. The reason why I'm so willing to believe that it's Helena in that hallway is because while Mark was completing Cold Harbor, Helly seemed to have reconciled with the idea that she could never have a full-on relationship with Innie Mark. And she understood that Innie Mark's best shot at survival was through reintegration. And Helly was the one to push Mark to this conclusion. When every time he said, well, Cobell could be lying, or I can't trust my Audi, she kind of was the one fighting back and being like, well, kind of at the end of the day, these people are about to shut us down anyway, so might as well follow them and help free somebody who's also been, really hurt by Lumen. And I don't think she would ever try to deter Mark from leaving Gemma, including standing in that in that hallway, because she knows that in Lumen, it's Lumen's rules, which mean they would never be able to live a substantially fulfilling life if he stays at Lumen. So yeah, and I also just think, and I think a lot of people have noticed this, Helly would never be okay with seeing someone like Gemma that distressed in that moment without trying to help her in some way. So I think that calm demeanor of just standing in the hallway and allowing Mark to make that decision was Helena basically kind of forcing both Gemma and Mark to stay in the Lumen building so that the additional Lumen forces could come and take over. I think Helena came back. So I think someone also made a sad realization that Gemma probably has no idea that Mark is severed. So in her mind, she's just seeing her husband connect with another woman. And if we can recall from episode 7, Chakai Bardo, Dr. Maurer said that Mark had remarried and actually had a child. So maybe she's seeing Mark hold hands with Helena, and she's thinking to herself, oh my God, he was so right. He did remarry. The show ends with Mark taking Helena's hand and running in the halls. So my conclusion, what did you guys think about this season? While there's some really bold creative directions, I think the show wrapped it up pretty nicely. Again, as I've mentioned, I don't think this is a mystery box show in the way that a lot of people have been interpreting it. I think this is more a psychological exploration, about having two selves, two people. What does it mean to fight for the right of a life? Whose life matters? There's so many psychological and philosophical questions that are raised here, and I think the show's more interested in that than kind of showing what cool technology Lumen is working on. Whatever further truths we learn about the severance process won't be as jaw-dropping as I think people think it will be. It's the characters and their journey ultimately that matters the most. I definitely think this finale got me completely enraptured, so it did its job. And so for the last time, for Severance Season 2, this was Strategic Delusion. Thank you, and I hope to see you next time.